The Conservative Party, and Dominic Raab in particular, I think his name's pronounced Raab, yep, are trying to shore up free speech within the UK. And as you can imagine, this has got many people who do not care about your rights or the privileges bestowed to them by the institutions of this great nation very, very angry. So, first of all, let's take a look at this article. Raab, Bill of Rights would give free speech a legal trump card. So the Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, has said proposals to replace Labour's Human Rights Act, which was legislated in 1998 and based off of the European Court of Human Rights, with a British Bill of Rights. So you can see straight away, nice centering of this is British, this is not something that's European, we're not in Europe anymore, this is our Bill of Rights for the rights of a British citizenry, which is, if nothing else, a decent step to be taking, I would say. The British Bill of Rights would ensure the principle of free speech became a legal trump card. The Deputy Prime Minister said the proposals, which are currently out for consultation, would better protect media freedom and put free speech on a different status in the pecking order of rights. And I would say to this that you might want to sort out a little bit of the BBC, who are always a bit averse to allowing different speakers to come onto their shows and discuss topics, primarily because while with private institutions, at least you can say, you know, they can determine who and what they have on their shows. BBC is a state-owned institution. So they should probably be clear that this needs to apply to them as well, because the BBC are very, very heavily biased in one direction. Mr. Raab said that he feared free speech and democratic debate were being whittled away by wokery and political correctness. And because of him using the wokery and political correctness terms, this is where a lot of the anger is going to be coming from that we'll see in a few minutes. He also said that the thrust is going to be making sure that when we balance rights, whether it's the right to free speech and the right to privacy or other rights, we make sure that the greatest overriding importance and weight is attached to free speech. Effectively, free speech will be given what will amount to a trump card status in a whole range of areas.
I mean, this all sounds quite good.
Oh, this is always the thing with the Tories, isn't it? Yeah. It sounds good, but it's the Tories implementing it, and I have in the past called them out on what I've referred to as performative anti-wokery, and I can only assume that this, I won't believe it until I see it, is basically what I'm saying. This could just be another case of them trying to put forward something that sounds great, but they're going to turn out to be all bark and bite
a little bit
again.
of red meat to people who are getting politically engaged because of the culture war. And if they throw this out and it's a bit of red meat for them but doesn't actually have any legal impact, then that would probably be a win for the Conservatives. So that might be what this is. Alternatively, maybe we're being a little too cynical with our long watch of the ineffectiveness of the Conservative Party.
I think we're very deserved in our cynicism, personally,
but
go on.
years of Conservative rule. And maybe there is going to be some actual positive change coming out of this, you know.
Hopefully, the very fact that they're throwing out the European-style human rights and bringing in
the fact that they
British,
even recognise this as something that appeals to voters is a good start, at least.
That's a good start, yes. We will still be clamping down on those who try to use either media or free speech to incite violence, to radicalise terrorists, or to threaten children, and all of those safeguards will still be in place. So the usual kind of provisions that you would give for freedom of speech, you know, no terrorists, no inciting violence, and don't groom children. So all stuff that I can stand behind as far as provisions for this go. So it will have a different status in the pecking order of rights, and I think that will go a long way to protecting this country's freedom of speech and our history, which is always very strongly protected freedom of speech. Mr. Raab also told the paper that the Bill of Rights would make deportation mandatory for all foreign criminals jailed for at least a year, which is a surprising turn of events that they want to crack down so hard, although perhaps Preeti Patel and everything that she's been saying may be getting through to the other members, but once again, we'll see if they actually hold themselves up to that promise. And meanwhile, The Telegraph has reported that as a part of a wider reform of parole proceedings, Mr. Raab is set to take back powers to override the parole board when it comes to the release of dangerous criminals from jail, which follows the public outcry at the decision to release double child killer and rapist Colin Pitchfork
That's
from
not his
jail.
real name, surely.
I mean, if it is, then it's rather fitting, and I can understand why that would elicit some outcry from the public. In this next article here, he does seem to be actually making moves against for harsher punishments for people who've committed awful crimes. So Justice Secretary blocks bid to move sadistic killer to open prison. A bid to move this person who stabbed a woman 60 times during sex in open prison has been blocked by Dominic Raab. He rejected the request to transfer Stephen Ling to a lower security jail, overruling a recommendation made by the parole board last month. It's the first intervention of its kind made by Mr. Raab after he promised to personally review requests to move high-risk offenders to open jails. So he's trying to do things. If nothing else, it shows that he's doing something somewhere.
That's true. I mean, and I agree with the call. The thing I'm concerned about is that does there not seem to be a rather significant accumulation of power in this sense to ministers?
That is also a worry.
Now, the fact that that's a good thing is because the bureaucracies beneath them are so incompetent and subverted that we need to see this kind of thing in order for anything remotely sane to be done. So it probably just speaks to a larger problem without actually solving it.
The fact that we're having to qualify that hopefully something remotely sane will happen within our governmental institutions,
which we pay for, of course.
Which we all pay for, is not a great sign.
No.
But it at least shows that he is trying to take on some conviction and try to move things along in a more positive direction.
In that direction, yes.
At least in that direction. But Dominic and the Conservatives in general, just changing the Bill of Rights, changing the Human Rights Act to a Bill of Rights will not necessarily stop a lot of the issues that are going on with online censorship, because it is not from the Human Rights Act that the allowance for censoring people comes from. It is from Section 127 of the Communications Act 2003, which reads, a person is guilty of an offence if he A, sends by means of a public electronic communications network a message or other matter that is grossly offensive or of an indecent, obscene, or menacing character, or causes any such message or matter to be so sent. And that is one of those laws that has the massive grey area set around the term grossly offensive, which has allowed everything to potentially be at risk when you're putting it online. This is what led to Count Dankula being arrested when he posted the Nazi pug video. So if you actually want to make some changes, if you're watching this, which who knows if you are or not, hopefully you are, hello Dominic. If you're watching this, that is where you need to aim. That is what you need to sort out and get off the books. You need to repeal that law so that we can actually start to talk about free speech within the nation. But taking a look just to prove what I'm saying here, that the Human Rights Act is not the cause of the lack of freedom of speech or censorship in the country. The Human Rights Act itself has Article 10, which is freedom of expression, which is everyone has the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority and regardless of frontiers. This article shall not prevent states from requiring the licensing of broadcasting, television, or cinema enterprises, so the states giving themselves nice monopoly over who can do that sort of stuff still, but the exercise of these freedoms, since it carries with it duties and responsibilities, may be subject to such formalities, conditions, restrictions, or penalties as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society in the interests of national security, territorial integrity, or public safety, for the prevention of disorder or crime, for the protection of health or morals, for the protection of the reputation or rights of others, for preventing the disclosure of information received in confidence, or for the maintaining of authority and impartiality in the judiciary. So that's all pretty typical provisions that you would give. I'd say potentially the only thing that needs shoring up is that for the protection of health or morals aspect of it, given that that is probably where the allowance for things like grossly offensive come into the other laws that have been set in the land. But here's what they say on the government website itself for the push for the British Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights will protect essential rights like the right to a fair trial and the right to life, which are fundamental parts of a modern democratic society. But we will reverse the mission creep that has meant human rights law being used for more and more purposes, and often with little regard for the rights of wider society. Section 12 has not had any real effect on the way that such issues have been determined by the courts. The government proposes the Bill of Rights legislation should contain a stronger and more effective provision, making it clear that the right to freedom of expression is of the utmost importance, and that courts should only grant relief impinging on it where there are exceptional reasons. There may also be a case for changing the test currently contained in that section of the Human Rights Act. The effect of this is that the person applying for an injunction to stop publication of material must satisfy the court in a trial. So there's lots of different things that they say here. But once again, this is all going to come down to whether they actually go ahead with it or not, and whether they enforce it in any strict and responsible manner. Because once again, this is one of those things the Conservative Party has done time and time again, where they come out, say they're going to do one thing, and then either do the exact opposite of it, or just posture in that direction, and then don't stick by their words. So we'll see. But as you can imagine, the fact that Dominic Raab said wokery and political correctness is what got a lot of people very triggered. And here's an article from The Independent illustrating that perfectly. Dominic Raab, if you're shouting about woke cancel culture or free speech, you're probably privileged. Well, I would say there is a certain truth to this, given that if you live in the UK and you are protected under the rights of the British people, that freedom of speech is a privilege. It's a privilege that we benefit from, because not every country in the world experiences free speech. Not every person in their home country has the right to free speech. Just go over and look at China and their social credit system. So I'd say it is absolutely a privilege that we have at least the facade of free speech, because I wouldn't say we absolutely have it right now. But to have free speech is a privilege, and it's not something that we should be stripping away from our own citizens for the sake of somebody's hurt feelings. But let's see what exactly it is that this Nadine Asbali, who is a English teacher in a school who I'd never heard of before, and searched her name and found that all of a sudden she's popped out of nowhere and released an article with The Independent, one with The Guardian, and one with another publication I can't remember, another very left-leaning one. So I wonder if she's going to start making waves in left circles.
It's funny how with a lot of these people, they just suddenly appear and they're suddenly everywhere. This is not uncommon at all, and then they just sort of become mainstream, like fixtures of the mainstream commentariat, and it happens on the right as well as the left.
Oh yes,
so it's quite curious. This phenomenon.
It does. I think it's when the person who's saying the right thing for your side
at the right time.
At the right time. A lot of publications are going to be very open, and then after you've got your foot in the door, you can kind of just stick around a bit.
Has she had some kind of high-profile tweet or something? Is that where this is going?
I didn't check out her Twitter, so I wouldn't be able to say. Just let me know in the comments if you know if she'd ratioed someone or owned a conservative on Twitter or something. But what she says is that now, apparently, is the time, in the midst of a cost of living crisis, at the tail end of a pandemic, and on the cusp of World War III, that something must be done about free speech. Of course, she's saying this as a clear whataboutery. How can you be focusing on free speech? How can you be focusing on the traditional institutions of your own country while all this other stuff is going on? We can't focus on the deliberate undermining of English values when other things are happening elsewhere in the world as well. And to that, I just say I can think about and be concerned about and focus my attention on more than one thing at once. Shockingly enough.
No, the whole whataboutery is quite tiresome. You see it everywhere on every issue.
It really is. They are deliberately, in reference to wokeness, creating a boogeyman that looks like something a little like a hipster in a gentrified East London borough, wearing ironic glasses and shouting at people for saying things that were once deemed perfectly acceptable in the 1960s. You can say that's a boogeyman. You can go ahead and say that's a boogeyman if you want. You have the freedom to do so. But is it inaccurate? Is the primary question that you should be asking yourself there. Because I can't point to one recently in London, although I'm sure there probably are, but recently in Manchester, there was a women's talk going on at an event venue, and of course, all of these hipsters in gentrified outfits wearing ironic glasses showed up to scream about trans rights and chant that these women should not have the chance to speak about women's issues. So tell me whether the boogeyman is accurate or not. What better than a scapegoat for everyone to hate instead of the government? I can hate both. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And the thing is...
Hate equally, right?
Yes, very much so. I'm no fan of the government, I'll tell you that.
There we go.
The thing is, freedom of speech is only heralded as a paramount human right by those who aren't on the receiving end of the kind of sentiment that makes you unsafe. Can you think of anything that's said about people on perhaps the wrong side of the political aisle that could make them feel unsafe, John?
Do you mean like death threats and that sort of
Like
thing?
death threats, like people like Andy No, for instance, trying to
Yeah.
report on far left violence
And
and
getting the
actually
whole
being
Kill Andy No thing being not just a hashtag, but also a regular graffiti
and a
tag.
not even just kept to words, kept to it branches out into actions as well. Because remember, he almost was killed at one point. So I don't know if you've got many a leg to stand on there. Sorry. And of course, being a teacher, she has to bring it up. As teachers, we always have to be impartial in the classroom. But how do we teach issues such as the mass genocide and invasion of half the world in a balanced way? How do we portray both sides to the humanization of black people? And why should we have to, if free speech is so supreme? Is my freedom of speech to teach my students about Churchill's racist views, or that anti-capitalism exists as a political stance, not worth protecting? Well, sadly, Nadine, you're an employed by
These
the
are the
state.
sort of people who are teaching your
Yes.
kids, by the way. I'm just putting
Yes,
that
this
out
is
there.
all. She wants to brainwash your kids, and she wants to be paid by you, the taxpayer, because she's probably working in a state school, let's be honest, and she wants to be paid by you to do so, to make your kids hate everything about you. And once again, if you are working in a professional environment, you do what your bosses tell you to do. It's not too unreasonable to say you are a teacher of English, teach them about English. Don't start going off on ideological rants about Churchill.
Yeah, what does
Please.
Churchill have to do with the English language, generally speaking? Unless they're studying his literature, which I doubt they are.
I
because
very much doubt they are.
I've not once studied Churchill's literature in an English
Me
class.
neither.
Then why is that? Why is that a thing? Why does she believe that free speech should start and end with her speech and her right to brainwash kids into her own political views? It's
Because-
a very backward and very, I hate to say it, but a very foreign way of looking at the issue. It's all about power and not about any appreciation for universal fairness.
I would absolutely agree. It's because leftist speech is the only correct speech, John. Because if you're not speaking leftist speech, you're hurting someone and you're trying to kill people.
Oh, no.
Don't you know? And, of course, alongside this comes the dishonest cope coming from members of the left as well as the newspapers. This man, Joe Morgan, saying, can anyone identify a difference between Putin's attack on cancel culture and Raab's attack on wokery?
I think Rob doesn't have quite as many tanks.
Yeah, I don't think Raab's invaded any countries recently, so there's one massive difference. I don't know if you really need any more, just because Putin's like...
I haven't noticed the caliber missiles flying overhead to raise the BBC offices to the ground.
Yeah, once again, just because Putin is making gestures towards the political right over in the West does not mean that every other indictment of cancel culture and wokery is the same as Putin invading another country, and I hate this. Hate this comparison.
The whole
completely.
thing
It's
is
awful.
like it's the same rhetorical trick as Hitler loved his dog. Therefore, if you love your dog, you are literally Hitler. It's that rhetorical trick. I can't remember the name of it, but it's just guilt by association.
Yes, I think that's probably the name of it. And if we move along, we've got Dr. Scholler saying white supremacy to get legal supremacy. Do I need to carry on? Do I really need
It's
to go?
Dr. Sholey. You could have stopped there.
Free speech is white supremacy. This is what they're saying now. Dominic Raab unveils plan to stamp out resistance against racial and social injustice. That's not what wokeness is. Wokeness wears that as a facade to bully its political opponents. We all know this. To be woke is a crime in the UK. No, to infringe other people's free speech...
I know.
Why am
It's
I
like
even...
talking to a child, isn't it?
Why am I explaining this to Dr. Moz Shogbamimu? And if we move along, one last one is Femi saying anyone who thinks it's okay for Dominic Raab to replace the Human Rights Act with a British Bill of Rights doesn't understand human rights. Human rights protect people from their governments, so they must be international.
That's wrong. That is wrong.
I mean...
And the Americans have rights enshrined in their constitution to protect people from governments, and by and large, they have worked for a long period of time.
Yes, I would say that's the ideal that human rights should be. But also, did the US need an international government overseeing them to ensure those rights for the public?
Well, that's a no.
That's a no.
Yeah.
If I'm worried about government, I would much rather be worried about a small local government or more local government than a large global government that's going to be looking over my shoulder wherever I go. So I don't think you understand the point there, Femi.
No, well, this is a classic distinction that you often find on the left in that between nationalists and internationalists, and he's clearly an internationalist.
Yes. I've seen him recently on Jeremy Vine arguing in favour of returning to the EU.
Right, absolutely. So everything he wants to do is to undermine the state, and I'm no friend of the state, but he wants to undermine them in favour of an international organisation which is just as threatening and dangerous as the state. And the only thing it has, and the only difference really, is that it's less accountable. So
yes.
There we go.
But yeah, that's about all I've got for that one. Dominic Raab seems to be making some of the right moves and annoying the right people with this, but it still remains to be seen whether anything actually productive or useful will come from it. So will this be another case of Tory anti-woke performity, or will it actually be something with some teeth on it? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast or the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as this video, How Does Russia Justify Its Aggression by John Wheatley and Thomas, looking at their side of the story and how they justify it from their perspective. But if you also want to follow John, you can also follow him on Getter at @JohnWheatley on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.